In this video, we are going to explore one of the most powerful parables Jesus told, the story of the persistent widow and the unjust judge, a story that speaks to us about persistence in prayer and how we must never lose hope, even when we feel our prayers are not being heard. Have you ever felt like your prayers are falling on deaf ears? Have you felt despair when it seems like heaven is silent? This story is a profound lesson on faith, justice, and the importance of continuing to ask, even when the answers do not come as we expect. Let's dive into the details of this parable and discover what it means for our spiritual life. Do not go away, because this message is especially for you if you have ever felt that heaven is silent. The story Jesus tells us about the unjust judge and the persistent widow is full of profound lessons on justice, perseverance, and faith. At the beginning of the parable, Jesus introduces us to a corrupt judge who neither fears God nor respects men. This judge by nature is selfish and uninterested in justice. His behavior is the opposite of what is expected of someone in his position, since in first-century Jewish society, judges were considered defenders of the weakest, such as widows and orphans. However, this judge is completely indifferent. Next, Jesus introduces the protagonist of the story, the widow. In Jewish culture, widows were seen as vulnerable and in need of the law's protection. According to the scriptures, God himself is presented as the protector of widows and orphans, those who have no one to advocate for them. The widow in this parable is the figure of the weak and unprotected person who needs justice. But despite her situation, she does not let herself be intimidated by the judge's indifference. Instead of giving up, she keeps appearing before him time and time again, asking for justice for her cause. The interesting thing about this story is that Jesus not only wants to show the widow's vulnerability, but also the persistence of her faith. Even though the judge has no intention of listening to her, she keeps insisting. The widow is not deterred by the lack of response. She continues to believe that her cause is just and that she deserves to be heard. As the story progresses, we see how the judge finally gives in, not because he cares about justice, but because the woman has bothered him so much with her insistence that he can no longer ignore her. In his own words, he says, "Even though I do not fear God nor respect men, because of the bother this widow causes me, I will avenge her, lest by her continual coming she wears out my patience." Luke 18:4-5. This moment is key as it reveals the judge's character. He does not act out of a sense of justice or morality, but for a personal reason. He gives in only to avoid public shame. At this point in the parable, Jesus invites us to reflect on our own faith. Do we act in the same way as the widow, standing firm in our requests despite difficulties and silence? Or do we give up when we do not see immediate results? The most important lesson here is perseverance in prayer and in faith. Even though the judge is selfish and uninterested, the widow does not stop seeking justice. In the same way, we must keep seeking, keep praying, keep believing, even when we do not see immediate answers. Jesus is showing us that true faith is not the kind that expects quick answers, but the kind that persists despite the silence, the kind that keeps hoping for justice without giving up. This story not only speaks to us about perseverance, but also about hope. The widow does not lose hope in her cause, even though the judge does not listen to her. She knows her cause is just, and that is why she keeps fighting for what is right. In the parable, Jesus does not present us with an immediate resolution, but rather invites us to sit in the waiting. The widow continues to ask for justice, but the judge at first remains impassive. This prolonged silence is crucial as it reflects one of the most common experiences we all face in the life of faith: waiting. Many of us find ourselves in situations where our prayers seem to go unheard, where heaven seems silent and answers do not come, no matter how persistent we are. This aspect of the parable is fundamental. The widow keeps going, despite the judge's indifference. In her day-to-day life, doubts and exhaustion inevitably arise. At first, the woman might have had hope that the judge would listen to her request, but after days, weeks, and even months, her hope could have faded. However, what truly stands out is her decision not to give up. Despite not seeing results, she keeps appearing before the judge. This act of persistent faith reflects the reality of our spiritual life. Often, Our prayers seem to be left hanging in the air without an immediate answer. Jesus knows that this is a difficult place to dwell, but he shows us that true faith is the kind that persists when everything seems silent. Imagine the widow walking the same path every day, facing the same judge who rejects her time and time again. Yet she does not give up. This is an act of emotional and spiritual resistance. The woman refuses to accept indifference. She continues to believe that what she is asking for is just, and that eventually something will change. In our own lives, we often find ourselves in moments of despair when life seems to run its course without changes. However, the parable teaches us that perseverance in faith has profound value. Faith is not just expecting something to happen immediately. Faith is standing firm even when everything seems stagnant. Like the widow, we must often keep knocking on heaven's door, trusting that even if we do not receive an answer at the moment we desire, God is working in the silence. Jesus challenges us to stand firm in our prayer, not to fall into discouragement, and not to lose heart because of the wait. Faith, as we see it in this widow, is not about getting what we want at the exact moment we ask for it, but about remaining constant in our trust and devotion to God, knowing that He will answer in His time. Patience and persistence in waiting are crucial lessons that Jesus leaves us in this parable. Through the widow, He shows us that the path to justice and an answer is not always fast, but constant effort in prayer and faith has a powerful impact. Even though the world may seem indifferent, our perseverance is not in vain, because at some point, the answer will come. As Jesus says, God will answer promptly those who cry out to Him day and night. Luke 18:7. At this point in the parable, Jesus presents us with a revealing twist. The judge who for so long had ignored the widow's pleas finally gives in, but he does so not out of justice, but out of selfishness. The widow has managed, with her persistence, to make the judge feel that his reputation is at stake, not because of his lack of justice, but because his indifference is becoming increasingly evident to the community. The public shame he could suffer is more unbearable to him than simply doing what the widow asks. This is a crucial point in the story. The judge gives in, but he does so for completely selfish reasons. He does not want to be shamed. There is no transformation in his heart, no change in his character. Throughout the parable, Jesus presents him as the extreme example of what a judge should not be. He has no respect for God or for men, and his judgment is completely uninterested in what is just or moral. His motivation is purely the fear of humiliation. Now, if we analyze the contrast with God, the lesson becomes even more powerful. If a corrupt judge who respects neither God nor men finally gives in to a widow's insistence, how much more will a God who is the exact opposite of this judge do so? Jesus' message is clear. God is not like this judge. He does not act out of selfishness or public shame, but because his nature is completely just and compassionate. If even a corrupted human being responds to pressure, how much more will a perfect and just God, who loves his children and desires to give them what is good? Through this contrast, Jesus is telling us that God's justice is far greater than that of the human judge. While the judge in the parable finally administers justice due to the widow's constant insistence, God does not need us to insist for him to do the right thing. He, by nature, desires to answer the prayers of his people. The parable, then, should not be seen as a teaching that we need to pressure God, but as a reminder that God, unlike the judge, is always willing to listen to us. This is a vital point for our life of faith. While we may sometimes feel that our prayers fall on deaf ears and that God does not answer, we must remember that he is not like the unjust judge in the parable. God does not grow tired of our prayers. He listens to them and is working in our favor, even if we do not always see the immediate answers we desire. Faith is not about pressuring God, but about trusting that he will always do the right thing and in his perfect time. The story of the unjust judge also reminds us that, although the world may be corrupt and full of injustices, God will always be the righteous judge. His justice is not based on shame or fear, but on his love and faithfulness. This contrast should reinforce our hope and trust in God, knowing that he will never fail. In this part of the parable, Jesus takes us to an even deeper level by giving us a direct lesson on prayer. If at first the widow represents perseverance and the judge injustice, now Jesus connects this story to our spiritual life. The key lies in persistence in prayer and faith in divine justice. Throughout the parable, we see that the judge acts for selfish reasons and not out of a genuine concern for justice. However, Jesus makes a very important contrast. If even a judge who neither fears God nor respects men finally gives in to a woman's insistence, how will God, who is just, loving, and merciful, not do so? The message is clear. God is not like that judge. He does not need to be pressured to act. He listens to our prayers and acts according to his perfect justice. The lesson Jesus leaves us is that we must persevere in prayer. The widow never abandoned her cause, and despite the silences and the lack of immediate answers, she kept seeking justice. This is the attitude Jesus invites us to have in our relationship with God. Prayer is not about a single request made in an instant. It is about a life of persistence, of continuing to trust that God will hear and answer our requests at the right time. Sometimes, as Christians, we find ourselves in moments of despair. Prayers do not seem to be answered, and the daily routine seems to consume our strength. In these moments, the parable of the widow reminds us that we must not lose heart. Jesus teaches us to keep praying, to keep asking, to keep seeking, despite the delays. The wait is not a sign of indifference on God's part, but an opportunity to strengthen our faith and learn to trust him more deeply. The act of persevering in prayer is a manifestation of faith, not because we are pressuring God to act, but because we are trusting that he will do so when the time is right. Persistent prayer shows that we continue to believe the cause is just and that our hope is not placed in an immediate answer, but in the character of God, who is faithful and just. Jesus also invites us to reflect on our attitude in prayer. Often our prayers can become mechanical or routine, but the parable calls us to authentic, persistent, and trusting prayer. The widow teaches us that even if we do not see immediate results, we must stand firm and keep asking, with the certainty that God answers the prayers of those who persevere. The final point of this parable, and perhaps the most important, is found in the final question Jesus asks. When the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on the earth? This question is not only a challenge, but an invitation to reflect on the kind of faith we are cultivating. The faith Jesus seeks is not the faith that crumbles when we do not get quick answers, but the faith that persists even when answers do not come immediately. The widow represents that kind of persistent faith, the faith that keeps seeking justice even when circumstances seem to be against it. She does not give up because she knows her cause is just. And this is the kind of faith God looks for in us. It is not a faith that only expects instant gratification, but a faith that stands firm, that keeps trusting, that keeps asking, even in the darkest moments. This is the heart of the parable's message. Faith is not simply a matter of receiving what we want the moment we ask for it. True faith is the one that keeps seeking justice, that persists in prayer, that keeps waiting for God's answer, even if we do not see immediate results. Jesus invites us to have a faith that trusts that, even if things are not resolved immediately, God is working in our lives. Furthermore, the parable reminds us that God's answer is always perfect. Although the judge in the parable acts out of selfishness and not out of justice, God, who is justice itself, will always answer at the right time. Jesus assures us that God's justice will not be delayed. In fact, when he acts, he will do so swiftly, even though sometimes we may not see it coming. Jesus' final invitation in this parable is that we keep our faith alive, even when the world seems indifferent, and that we never stop praying, even if heaven is silent. Persistent prayer is a sign of our trust in God's faithfulness. Like the widow, we must keep asking, keep seeking, and above all, keep trusting. The parable of the persistent widow is a profound lesson on perseverance in faith and in prayer. It invites us to stand firm in our trust in God, even when we do not see immediate answers. The widow's persistence is not a lesson on how to pressure God, but on how to keep our faith alive when everything seems silent. Jesus challenges us to keep seeking, to keep asking, and to keep believing, knowing that, even if we do not see the results right away, God answers persistent prayer. Faith is not about receiving quick answers, but about trusting in God's justice and his perfect timing. If you have ever felt that your prayers are not being heard, Remember that the story of the widow teaches us not to give up. Keep seeking, keep praying, because God, the righteous judge, always answers the prayer of the righteous. Do not lose heart.